Biden White House elevated two people to new roles in the administration in what is an apparent sign of not slowing down what critics say its proxy war against Russia via Ukraine. Victoria Nuland has been named acting Deputy Secretary of State, which makes her second in command at the State Department right under Antony Blinken. And the Senate Armed Services Committee has voted to confirm Biden's selection of Charles Q. Brown Jr. as the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He will be replacing Mark Milley. Now, a Senate vote will now happen on whether to confirm Brown, who is currently the Air Force Chief of Staff. According to an article from Responsible Statecraft, Nuland's appointment will be a, quote, boon for Russia hawks who want to turn up the heat on the Kremlin, but for those who favor a negotiated end to the conflict in Ukraine, a promotion for the notoriously undiplomatic diplomat will be a bitter pill.
During her time as Assistant Secretary of State in the Obama administration, she reportedly had a call with the United States ambassador to Ukraine, during which Nuland expressed her support for putting Ukrainian Arseniy Yatsenyuk into power, who would become the country's prime minister between 2014 and 2016. And looking at General Brown, earlier this month, he called for more United States bases in Asia and increased efforts to arm Taiwan, according to anti-war.
Fantastic. Yeah, Victoria Nuland is very much a responsible figure for American foreign policy, with the exception of during the Trump years, for the last 20 years. So she originally joined, she was part of the Clinton administration all the way going back to the 90s. Mm-hmm. She was a top advisor then to Vice President Dick Cheney during the Iraq War, specifically on Iraq matters. Mm-hmm. She was then served under the Obama administration, doing relations with NATO. Right. Specifically, then she was out of office during the Trump years. She would surface every now and then to complain to the media that Trump was isolationist and we're withdrawing from the world stage and we're not bombing enough people. And then she resurfaced and has joined the Biden administration. She was the one infamously who said that, of the Nord Stream pipeline, something was going to happen, which is part of the reason a lot of people were convinced that the U.S. had something to do with the explosion, because she made it sound like we were going to do something along those lines. This is a sign, and I know much less about the other figure, but of course, more military bases everywhere. This is just so. I think it's bad policy. Obviously, I think it's also out of step with the current political moment. I think most people, many people who are Republicans, who are Democrats, who are independents, are sick of the foreign policy consensus of the last 2 decades and really want something different.
Yeah, she comes from this cohort of very career guys, is what they say, in the foreign policy establishment, where she's worked for many administrations. She's had dealings with NATO. She worked for sort of this post-Cold War era, if you can even call it that, democracy mission, where rather than having the CIA directly involved in a lot of operations, across the globe to influence elections in the direction of ensuring that people at the heads of state across the world are people that we favor, right? People that are either pro-USA or not anti-USA. So they funded dissident groups across the world. They've sowed discontent with regimes that we don't agree with. This kind of approach that, the National Endowment for Democracy and groups that are similar takes is something that Victoria Nuland has been involved with pretty deeply. I would put her strongly in the camp of American intervention foreign policy. And that's really concerning, considering her involvement in NATO and her deep involvement advising on all Ukrainian foreign policy. It seems to me that the Biden administration is continuing that legacy of this kind of interventionist foreign policy, exerting American influence in the world, rather than, taking a step back and saying, let's assess how foreign policy has gone for us in the past half of a century. Maybe we should change how we approach some things. And I think, this is kind of the legacy foreign policy continuing here.
Right. It shows that it's not about party. Yeah. There is a contingent of, as you said, career officials who work for both parties in all sorts of administrations. The agenda continues. Their agenda of a neoconservative foreign policy, where we have a more robust military presence everywhere, where we have more military bases, where we seek aggression and confrontation rather than diplomacy, where we're always looking out for threats, where we're trying to contain Russia, China, etc., via means that I think actually make the world a more dangerous place, that are reckless, and that risk a larger confrontation. But that is their ideology. That's what it was in the Middle East. And instead of the Middle East discrediting all these people, as you would have expected it to do after, again, the judgment of the American people. Most people intuitively understand that Iraq was a catastrophic mistake. It's insulting to even call it a mistake. It killed how many people? Destabilized an entire country. It turned the region over to increased terrorism and violence and disorder. Afghanistan, a similar story. Our intervention in Libya, producing horror after horror. But instead of discrediting these people, they persist. They can't be gotten rid of. They still are in what Republicans now refer to as the deep state, the policy-making arms of our federal government that someone like Donald Trump spoke out against, but then was unequal to the task of actually managing and reducing, which is a huge frustration I have with him.
I think the biggest security threat to the American people is not this idea that there are terrorists somewhere else. The biggest security threat to the American people is the direct actions of our State Department and career foreign affairs officials that decide to take this interventionist approach to foreign policy and meddle in the political affairs of other governments and influence elections in a direction that oftentimes destabilizes countries. We have sown terror groups through this action all across the globe. And so, when I think about the United States funding the Mujahideen in Afghanistan that then become the Taliban, it's not hard to tell how these terror groups form. Us wreaking havoc all across the globe is how these terror groups form, and it's very undemocratic that so many people that make decisions of such consequence are not elected. And that's why this approach that I think Ramaswamy is taking by saying, here's a list of judges I would appoint. DeSantis by saying, I would consider appointing RFK Jr. to the role of, the FDA or CDC. I would like to see more people running for public office through the democratic process saying, this is who I would appoint to foreign policy establishment positions. I want a list of who you're appointing before I vote for you.
Well, in response to the promotions, journalist Glenn Greenwald tweeted, Dick Cheney's top national security advisor for the Iraq War, uber neocon Victoria Nuland, is always empowered no matter who is president, unless it's Trump, when she has no role. Is it worth asking why Cheney's top advisor fits so well in the Obama and Biden State Department? I mean, I think that's, basically exactly what we were just saying, is that it's not about party, it's the policy, and the policy doesn't really change. And then again, I'm not trying to give Trump too much credit, because even though the policy did change, and he said the right things, but he didn't actually rid the government of the people who have this view of policy that is totally antithetical to what the actual American people want. So if he returns to the White House, or some other Republican or independent iconoclastic thinker wants to chart a different course, it's like the American people, I think, are clearly on board with this vision, but then you have to actually do something about it.
Yeah, I think if the American people knew the extent of the operations that Victoria Nuland was involved in, I think they would say this is an unstable person who does dangerous things abroad. But because it's this polished foreign policy establishment official approach of this is what we do. We sow discontent in other countries by funding adversaries, funding the Arab Spring. That's something that the National Endowment for Democracy we know did. The stuff that is declassified that the deep state has done is far more interesting than anything we could possibly theorize, and far more damning. The information's out there. It's in declassified CIA documents, but because it's this official protocol and it's, the foreign policy establishment's way of always doing things, we don't think of these people as, terrible international criminals like other people who look at the United States actions abroad and really see. I think we're lucky that other countries that we've done this in see this as the actions precisely of our foreign policy establishment and not a reflection of the beliefs of the American people. They could retaliate against us, but I think they realize that it's a small group of elites in our country and that the majority of the American public don't support these ideas.
All right, we'll have more Rising right after this.